Proverbs are not passe and definitely not dead. Proverbs, those old gems of generational tested wisdom, help us in our everyday life and communication to cope with the complexities of the modern human condition. This was from a book called Proverbs Are Never Out of Season by Wolfgang Meter. And whatever lack of respect we might have for Proverbs today, the proverb is the workhorse of language. Look before you leap. You reap what you sow. You get what you pay for. Don't pour the baby out with the bathwater. No pain, no gain. Different strokes for different folks. And on and on and on and on. Television, magazines, and popular speeches are absolutely filled with proverbs. And yet, few of us give any attention to where they come from or how they work. It shouldn't surprise us that the book of Proverbs has fallen on very hard times in our days, the Old Testament in general. We use Proverbs everywhere, but we don't give the same culture significance as recent medical and scientific discoveries do. One, wisdom is grounded in the fear of the Lord or the fear of Yahweh. Two, wisdom is concerned with discerning the order that the Lord has built into creation. Three, wisdom focuses on discerning God's ways in particular circumstances. Four, wisdom is grounded in tradition. While Job and Ecclesiastes deal specifically with how to live when life appears to have turned upside down, Proverbs gives us the ABCs of wisdom when life is generally going right. So, the outline of Proverbs, we see that we have from chapters 1 through 9, 10 through 29, and 30 and 31 is how we can break these down. So, Proverbs 1 to Proverbs 9:18 is admonitions and interludes. For instance, A, Proverbs 1 through 7, title and prologue. B, chapter 1, 8 through 19, first admonition, parental warning against sinners. C, chapter 1, 20 through 33, first interlude, woman wisdom's prophetic warning. D, chapter 2, verse 1 through 22, second admonition, search for wisdom. E, chapter 3, 1 through 12, third admonition, instruction in the fear of the Lord. F, chapter 3, verse 13 through 20, second interlude, cosmic wisdom, creation, wisdom, blessings. G, chapter 3, verse 21 through 35, fourth admonition, warning and admonitions. H, chapter 4, 1 through 9, fifth admonition, tradition and wisdom. I, chapter 4, verse 10 through 27, sixth admonition, wisdom and ways. J, chapter 5, 1 through 23, seventh admonition, adultery and folly, marriage and wisdom. K, chapter 6, 1 through 19, third interlude, examples of folly and money, sloth, good and evil. L, chapter 6, verse 20 through 35, eighth admonition, warning against adultery. M, chapter 7, verse 1 through 27, ninth admonition, folly lurking to catch a fool. N, chapter 8, verse 1 through 36, fifth interlude, cosmic woman wisdom, final speech. O, chapter 9, verse 1 through 18, the sixth interlude, two houses, two women, two ways. Then the second group breaks down to Proverbs 10, verse 1 through Proverbs 22, verse 16, the first collection of Solomon. A, Proverbs 10, verse 1 through Proverbs 15:33, Proverbs of antithesis. B, chapter 16, verse 1 through chapter 22, verse 16, Proverbs of royalty. Then we could break it down 3, Proverbs 22, verse 17 through Proverbs 24, verse 34, collected sayings for a son. A, chapter 22, verse 17, and chapter 23, verse 35, instructions for justice, upright living, and warnings. B, chapter 24, verse 1 through 22, wisdom as a son's hope and treasure. C, chapter 24, verse 23 through 34, wisdom, justice, and order in society. Fourth point, Proverbs 25, verse 1 through Proverbs 29:27, the second collection of Solomon, concerns of the ruler. A, chapter 25, verse 1 through chapter 27:27, kings, fools, and friends. B, chapter 28, verse 1 through chapter 29:27, justice, Torah, and warnings about fools. The fifth point is Proverbs 30, Agur and wisdom in the world upside down. Sixth, Proverbs 31, King Lemuel and the valiant woman. A, Proverbs 31, 1 through 9, King Lemuel's wisdom. B, chapter 31, 10 through 31, the valiant woman of wisdom. It is fair to say that the book moves from symbolic and ideal wisdom in Proverbs 1 through 9 to wisdom in random events of daily life in Proverbs 10 through 29, and then wisdom to two extreme conditions in Proverbs 30 and 31. So Proverbs 1:1, the authorship of Proverbs, we see that in 1:1 it says the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. And Proverbs is introduced as a collection of Solomon, King David's son, and the king over Israel. Royal figures in the ancient world were distinguished by their expertise in areas of wisdom, justice, and law. And Solomon was the only king in Israel's time to reign in a time of prolonged peace. Yet David, on his deathbed, clearly charged Solomon to adhere to the Torah, or the law of Moses. 1 Kings 2:3 talks about this. In fact, um, the king in the Old Testament was preeminently required to be a student of the Torah, according to Deuteronomy 17, verse 17 through 20, where it tells us that a king is supposed to be very fluent with the Torah in order to maintain justice and righteousness in Israel. So here we are at a wonderful um, interdependent relationship between wisdom and the law. And we see that the law leaves large areas of life in need of particular direction on how to be faithful to God. Solomon, as the prime example of the wise king, also faced many situations in which there was no obvious solutions. It is in such particular situations that wisdom is required. And that goes for us too, not just for kings and presidents and stuff. There's areas that are going to rise in life where we definitely need wisdom. And we know that from 1 Kings 2 through chapter 11 that Solomon was gifted with wisdom and had a special interest in accumulating wisdom of all sorts. Proverbs 1:1 clearly associates Proverbs with Solomon, but at the same time, sections like Proverbs 22:17 through Proverbs 24:34 and Proverbs 30 through chapter 31 suggest that several sources, perhaps over many centuries, were brought together to build the final book of Proverbs. But still, it is interesting to note that while this section is ascribed to Hezekiah in Proverbs 25:1, Agur in Proverbs 30 verse 1, and Lemuel in Proverbs 31:1, are all very commonly accepted as historically valid. The sections assigned to Solomon are frequently questioned by modern authors, um, though without good reason. See, Solomon's great wisdom and his failure to live it out play a central role in the theology of wisdom in the Old Testament. So then we get to Proverbs 1, 2 through 6, verse 2 through 6. Not only are Proverbs necessary for day to day conversation, but they also communicate the very basic sense we need to um, have in our lives in a constantly changing world. Proverbs 1, 2 through 6 offers a long list of wisdom that is beneficial to us. So we'll actually read this portion here. So here it says in Proverbs 1, 2 through 6, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment and equity, to give subtlety to the simple, to the young man, knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall obtain unto wise counsel. To understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. So, Proverbs will enable one to gain wisdom and understanding, as verse 2 says us wisdom and instruction and understanding, right? And a disciplined and just life, it tells us about in verse 3. Discipline is a very serious aspect for us Christians. It will enable the immature to become mature, as you see in verse 4, that a young man will learn knowledge and discretion so they can go from immature to maturity. And the wise to become wiser, as verse 5 says. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsel. Proverbs not only provides wisdom instruction, but it will also teach one how to interpret the sayings of the wise, as verse 6 says. Reading the Proverbs require wisdom as well. So let's actually jump to the next chapter, chapter 2, 6 through 8. For the Lord giveth wisdom, out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. He layeth up sound wisdom for the righteous. He is a buckler to them that walk uprightly. He keepeth the paths of judgment and preserveth the way of his saints. But also notice, let's go to chapter 4. Let's go to 11 and 12, where it says, I have taught thee in the way of wisdom. I have led thee in right paths. When thou goest, thy steps shall not be straitened, and when thou runnest, thou shalt not stumble. So, ethnic, the ethnical instruction in Proverbs 1 through 9, um, has this imagery of a strong connection between action and reward. Those who obey will be blessed with safety, riches, and long life. For instance, look here in Proverbs 4 6. Forsake her not, and she shall preserve thee. Love her, and she shall keep thee. Let's go back one chapter, chapter 3, verse 9 through 10. Honor the Lord with thy substance and with the first fruit of all thy increase. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. Let's also look in verse 1 and 2. My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace they shall add to thee. And Proverbs 2:21, for the upright shall dwell in the land, and the perfect shall remain in it. So the first 9 chapters seek to build our confidence in the rewards of living wisely, of following in the ways of wisdom. Indeed, wisdom in the Old Testament is about how to negotiate life successfully in God's good but fallen world. While in Proverbs 1 through 9, the book sets out the principal basics to such a wise life, Proverbs 10 through 30, as we will explore throughout this, explore the character consequence structure in a more um, way of focusing, among other things, on um, on what happens when we're not following the way that we're supposed to. We start seeing these consequences that take place. Before we can run, we must learn to walk, correct? And that's what Proverbs 1 through 9 introduces the student into the overarching principles of wisdom. Only then will one be ready for the more complex nuisances of day-to-day life that we go through, because life always has obstacles placed before us. So, Proverbs 1:7 is the foundation of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, right? And that's what we see here. But fools despise wisdom and instruction. So, God gives wisdom generously. And we see this, for instance, Proverbs 2:6-7. For the Lord giveth wisdom out of his mouth, cometh knowledge and understanding. He layeth up sound wisdom for the righteous. He is a buckler to them that walk uprightly. But it's not unconditionally. One must fear him first and foremost in order to obtain wisdom. And the Old Testament theology of fear is a much richer concept than our modern notion of trembling and terror that we get. In Deuteronomy, fearing God is equated with loving him, obeying his commandments. And we see this in Deuteronomy chapter 10, for instance, uh, starting from verse 12, we see, and now Israel, what doth the Lord thy God require of thee, but to fear the Lord thy God and walk in all his ways, and to love him and to serve the Lord thy God with all thine heart and with all thy soul, to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command thee this day for thy good. Behold, the heaven and the heaven of heavens is the Lord's thy God, the earth also with all that is therein. Only the Lord had a delight in thy fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, even you above all people, as it is this day. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff necked. So, in fact, the use of the fear of the Lord in Exodus to Deuteronomy is always in context of the Redeemer and lawgiver Yahweh the Lord, who loved Israel and redeemed her from her slavery as to become his people over whom he rules. We get this in Exodus 3, Exodus 6. Fearing God was the appropriate response to salvation. We see this in Exodus 20:20. And Moses said unto the people, fear not, for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your face, that ye sin not. Fearing God thus refers to a loving reverence for the Lord, the Creator, who has brought us to himself, as Exodus 19:4 says, ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings and brought you unto myself, and to a lifestyle that fits with such an attitude. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom in two ways. The Hebrew word for beginning, it has this poetic figure of speech that is often translated as the head or the first thing. And in the search for wisdom, fearing the Lord involves both starting point of the journey and the foundation or ground on which a life of wisdom is built. One must commit to the Lord God Almighty and his plan for creation to begin attaining wisdom. Then loving and obeying the Lord God becomes the means to continue a lifelong journey of using wisdom to find his ways in life in every area of God's good creation. God created the earth and said it was good. We look at the earth and say it's bad. It's the sin. I can't walk in the woods and say, oh, I hate this world. I walk in the woods and I see wildlife. I see the fish jumping in the pond. I see the breeze blowing through the trees, the flowers starting to blossom. This is good because God said it was good. So the fear of the Lord and the structure of Proverbs. See, the fear of the Lord is it is foundational to wisdom. That it shows up as a thematic refrain, not only in Proverbs, but also in Job and Ecclesiastes. The fear of the Lord is repeated 14 some odd times in the book of Proverbs, having been carefully placed throughout the book to alert us to wisdom's strong emphasis on loving allegiance to the covenant of God. Proverbs 1-9, you get the instruction for the fear of the Lord begins with knowledge. Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord in the Father's first speech in Proverbs 1:29, the fear of the Lord as the knowledge of God in Proverbs 2:5. We get the fear of the Lord in wisdom's call from creation in Proverbs 8. And then we get wisdom's last speech, fear as the beginning of wisdom, in Proverbs 9:10. And then you get another little outline. You get Proverbs 10 through 29. The fear of the Lord in these Proverbs sayings in Proverbs 10:27, Proverbs 14:27, Proverbs 15, verse 16 and 33, Proverbs 16:6, for instance, Proverbs 19:23, Proverbs 22:4, and Proverbs 23:17, which we'll go to that one. Proverbs 23:17, let not thine heart envy sinners, but be thou in the fear of the Lord all the day long. And then you get Proverbs 30 and 31. This is the traits of a valiant woman. Fear of the Lord is one of these predominant virtues that she has. For instance, Proverbs 31 verse 30. Favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. So not only is this the phrase, this phrase is a refrain in the book of Proverbs, but it's also a placement at the beginning and the end of Proverbs, the fear of the Lord. And this kind of like functions as a bookend, indicating the central characteristic of the fear of the Lord to wisdom. And cultures in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia also had a very well established wisdom traditions as well. Schools and collected sayings, most of which predated Israel's wisdom writings. And what makes the wisdom in the book of Proverbs unique amongst all these other uh, belief systems in the Egyptian and Mesopotamian, where they have multiple gods they serve, is that more than anything else, it is a loyalty to one true God. And that fear of this God, not like the fear that we have the notion of trembling and whatnot, is central to understanding. Proverbs is not a disconnected group of sayings, but a highly memorable body of teachings with a consistent message about life in God's world. So, Proverbs 1 through 9, my friends, we see that it introduces us to the first major grouping in Proverbs. This sense of order provides the basis for interpreting the whole of life and all its um, aspects that happen in life. I mean, life has a lot of things that happen, and this is what these first 9 chapters go through. And then we see that it's represented by individual proverbs in Proverbs 10 through 29, and it is essential to get a good understanding of the material in these first 9 introductory chapters in order to understand the book as a whole. Chapter 1 through 9 is some of the keyest points to understand the rest of the Proverbs. And these 9 chapters share a combination of images and theological allusions to creation, and then most significantly, they address the son or a young man very frequently. For instance, Proverbs 1:8, Proverbs 2:1, Proverbs 3:1, Proverbs 4:1. We'll just go to Proverbs 4:1. Hear ye children the instruction of a father, and attend to know understanding. So, we're seeing an instruction of a dad, a father, trying to give us this wise wisdom. And the frequent use of son does not make Proverbs exclusive to men, but rather it is a way of heightening what we have called this urgency in wisdom with the image of an adolescent becoming a man. So, yes, adolescent girls and boys getting ready to become men and women in today's world. There's a lot of things that these proverbs are telling us about, coming out of adolescence and coming into adulthood, which is very key. And I mean, for instance, whatever it might be, graduation, marriage, moving, retirement, coming into adulthood, whatever these moments might be, this first 9 set of chapters in Proverbs, it moves in a way that that gives us promise and a danger that can happen. Wisdom is needed to make the transition carefully. Proverbs captures this exciting stage of life and uses a parent's voice.
And we should be encouraging our kids about their adulthood, regardless if we're in the end times or not. We should be encouraging them, as the Bible says, that they move on in life. It doesn't mean they forget and forsake their mom and dad, but we are to teach them. And that's what the Proverbs is sitting here teaching too. It's showing them as they're coming into adulthood as well. See, wisdom is not for the young alone. It also exhorts the wise to increase their own wisdom. Yes, it does. Proverbs 1:5. Proverbs 1:5 goes on to say, a wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain to wise counsel. And this is the same urgency that is for young men and women becoming adults in society, that we must increase our learning. And how do we do that? Of course, we have to have a fear of the Lord. This is the beginning of knowledge. See, a closer examination of these chapters will focus on two important groups of material. The first is a basic set of instructions from parents to children about living wisely, what we call admonitions, right? We hear that word a lot in the Bible. The second group shares a similar language with the first, but it also can be distinguished by theological poems or interludes, whose major concern is the symbolic and metaphorical world of women, houses, ways, and creation. So, admonitions and interludes, we get 9 sets of admonitions. Proverbs 1, verse 8 through 19. You get right here. This is an admonition about the enticement of sinners, of course. Then we get to Proverbs 2, 1 through 22, the value of wisdom. It is the whole chapter in whole. It is an admonition. Proverbs 3, 1 through 12, as you see here, it is trust in the Lord with all your heart. And then we can also jump to 21 21 through 35. You could put more of it if you wanted to, but in particular, 21 through 35, blessed are those who find wisdom. And then we can get to Proverbs 4, 1 through 9. We see a father's wise instruction to the children. And then from 10 to 27 can also touch on more of this teaching here, breaking these two apart, studying the first 9 verses, going with the rest of them. Let's get to chapter 5, verse 1 through 23, and it's warning us against adultery. That's a key input. We get Proverbs 6. We can go from 20 to 35, as you see, and this is warnings against adultery again. And then we get to Proverbs 7, 1 through 27, as you can tell, the whole chapter. We get to this warning against the adulteress. So we see here, for instance, let's go back to chapter 4, and let's see here. Hear ye children the instruction of your father. Let's just look at this point. Here is where we hear an urgent tone in the voice, right? And then we get the second half of it, that you can attend to no understanding. Basically, pay attention. And for I give you good doctrine. We pause here. I'm wanting to teach you some sound learning, and do not forsake my law, which is teachings. You have to understand what the word law means, of course, not just like sacrificing he goats and she goats, right? So this is a poetic parallelism here. We see hear and pay attention in the first point. Hear and pay attention. Key. And then it's we see that, so you can get instruction, right? Instruction and understanding, these go together. And that I will give you good teaching, good doctrine. Don't forsake it. That's really key. So the view of wisdom emerged in 6 interludes, because we talked about admonitions and interludes. So now we go to Proverbs 1, and we go from 20 to 33. We see here the call of wisdom. Here's an interlude in between the admonition to say, hey, now we need to attend to this. And of course, then we have to jump to chapter 3 to get another interlude from 13 to 20. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom. And then we go from chapter 6, 1 through 19, very key point, practical warnings. Then from chapter 7, 1 through 27, we also see that warning against the adulteress. This can also act as an interlude, even though it also acted um, as an admonition. This is also an interlude. It's an admonition and an interlude in between all these teachings. Then we get to chapter 8, 1 through 36. Whole chapter, guys. The blessing of wisdom. Then chapter 9, from 1 through 18, we get the way of wisdom and the way of folly. We get this interlude that tells us this. So here, wisdom is understood through the metaphors of two ways, two houses, two cosmic figures. Uh, aka, you get, you know, Lady Wisdom, the wisdom of God, of course, and then you get the harlot, folly, right? The harlot. These are two. These women appeal to the young man because if you're reading this chapter, you see that it's not just erotically, but sensually and emotionally and socially and economically to walk in their ways and to abide in their houses. You get the harlot wants you to come into their house, but you get the true wisdom. She wants you to come into her house and to have life because you will have life. It even tells you that you will live if you're with this. So as young men and women prepare to leave home and build a house, these two represent two worldviews, two ways of interpretation in the world, the way of wisdom and the way of folly. And the way of folly, this harlot appeals to the young man, is driven at his heathen and sensual appetite. I want to curb your enthusiasm. She makes no reference to God and his plans for good in man's creation. No, instead, she uses things from 13 through 18. She uses things to actually lead you to death. To lead you to death. Notice that there is a desire for her to command the house. She wants to command the house. The harlot wants to command the house. The ways and the appetites of the young man, all for selfish gain. Nothing that is for your good, nothing for anything. Overcome with a heathen appetite, she lies to the young man about the world and its purpose and shows the young man or young woman a way of death. And in order to counter this harlot's folly, the interludes constantly return back to wisdom, the true wisdom, the lady you want in your life, her experiences, her origin with the Lord, and her account of the created order that is in this earth. And theologically, the cosmic imagery is thus meant to convince us that wise living involves walking harmoniously along the grain of the created order. To understand the theological richness of creation in Proverbs, we need to recall the historical understanding of wisdom presented. The ancient worlds of Egypt, Israel, and Mesopotamia viewed their lives as participating in a great created order, a great living harmony of all things. Justice and wisdom are a matter of creating and restoring a sense of society, political, economic, and religious order. Many of these cultures, in fact, have just one or two words that can mean wisdom, justice, or creative order, all signifying the ability to live fittingly in this world's order. So we see the interlude, for instance. Let's go back to chapter 3 and let's go to verse 18. She is a tree of life to them that lay hold upon her, and happy is everyone that retaineth her. So we see this wisdom, tree of life. This, of course, echoes from the famous tree of life passages in Genesis 2 through 3, the tree of life alluded in places like Psalm 1 and Jeremiah 17:8. We find this rich expression in three places, Genesis 2 3, Proverbs, and Revelation, all passages that deal with the cosmic order of God's creation. In the ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian creation stories, the gods or kings use wisdom to oppose the forces of chaos and build their own houses. But the context in Proverbs 3 connects the wisdom and knowledge God uses to found and establish the creation. Verse 19 and 20. The Lord by wisdom hath founded the earth, by understanding hath established the heavens, by his knowledge the depths are broken up, and the clouds drop down the dew. So wisdom is available to all human beings. It's just a matter of how you find it. Proverbs 24, verse 3 through 4, it tells us, through wisdom is a house builded, and by understanding it is established, and by knowledge shall all the chambers be filled with all precious and pleasant riches. So this isn't like the ancient Egyptians and Mesopotamians say, this isn't just for gods and kings. Genesis 1 and 2 uh, similarly depicts God's work in creating a home and equipping it at the best environment for humankind. His work is creative, making, and then filling, and then provision comes. For instance, you get day one, light. Day two, heavens and water. Day three, you get land. Also in day three, you get light bearers like the sun, moon, and stars. Day four, birds and fish. Day five, beasts and humans, right? So God's creation is also generous, inviting the land, animals, and humans, each to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. We hear this a lot in Genesis 1:22, for instance. And the same language of wisdom, knowledge, and creating is also it's also found here in Exodus 35:30 through 36:7 with the building and provision of the tabernacle, as God has given this wisdom and knowledge of how he wants this constructed, of course, with the Spirit of God upon them, a creative illusion of the Spirit hovering over the deep. In Genesis 1:2, these men prepared the tabernacle as a new house for God's dwelling. Proverbs 20, verse 3 through 4, that we read, wisdom and knowledge are needed for humanity to build and to establish a house and fill its rooms, right? But also, we need to notice the role of the priest and the women who are wise of heart and build God's house. I mean, for instance, you get the priestly garments, the priestly roles throughout Scripture. We see that, for instance, here talking about how the women even have to construct these things, and it was important right here how they had to construct it, because we also see back here because they had to spin with their hands, both blue and of purple and of scarlet and fine linen. But the reason why we were at Exodus 28, because this is also the same type of stuff the priests are wearing. This was very important. And this uses the same raw material that we see, for instance, in the book of Proverbs. It's something to note for sure. As you see, the valiant woman, she seeketh wool and flax and worketh willingly with her hands. We also, in verse 19, she layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. So we see there is a definite connection here, and wisdom has to be used for all this. So, what could be more important, even urgent, than getting this wisdom? Above all, we get these clues all pointed to the extraordinary care and love with which God forms the world in which humans are to dwell in. We work in, we create things in, we do all types of things in. At every point, the creation bears the marks of the handiwork of the Lord, who created the world by wisdom and offers wisdom to humans so that they might live life to the full in his very good creation. And I'm going to keep on emphasizing that because there's a lot of people, they're so depressed with life. They say, oh, I hate this earth. Well, how can you hate something that God said, behold, it's very good? God never said it's the sin that's the problem, guys. Wisdom attributes her origins to the beginning of God's creation. That's where we go to Proverbs 8, because Proverbs 8 is all about the creative order. Verse 22, the Lord possesses me in the beginning of his ways before his works of old. See, we highlight this repetition of words. For instance, in verse 27 through 29, when he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass upon the face of the depth, when he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep, when he gave to the sea his decree, and the water should not pass his commandment, when he appointed the foundations of the earth. You notice foundations happens a couple times. Established is being talked about, prepared. These are very important contexts, See, the poetry in this passage moves from the heavens in verse 27 to the earth in verse 29 in order to encompass everything created. And in Proverbs 8:33, we see here, hear instruction and be wise and refuse it not. God has builded or etched an order into the world and wisdom personified here uh, as a woman, of course. The wisdom is labeled as a woman here, as you get the way of wisdom, the correct woman to be with, or you get the harlot of folly, which is the wrong woman to be with, right? So it's very key to discerning. Wisdom offers us the key to interpreting our world, its beginning, its purpose, its shape, its direction. Proverbs 8:30, for instance, then I was by him as one brought up with him, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him. So in this verse, we see that wisdom is involved as God fashions the heaven and the earth. And this communicates to us the creation is not only good but very good, as Genesis 1:31 said. Psalm 104 is a long poem expanding this message. For instance, let's go to Psalm 104. We're not going to read the whole psalm, but we will look at one in particular verse. We'll go to verse 26, for instance, where we see it says, there go the ships. There is that Leviathan whom thou hast made to play therein. So we read that this great Leviathan is made to frolic the sea, play around in it, which God has made. And we also see that there is uh, this comforting tone with wisdom, the wisdom's message. Many voices in Christian tradition portray life as a dangerous tightrope, a straight and narrow line where we dare not to misstep. True, narrow is the path, but this wisdom testifies to the harmony and order of a large and open landscape that we do have to be cautious walking about. Every day is a new adventure, which may be explored joyfully with wisdom as our map. See, one, we get that God delights in this wisdom. Two, that this wisdom dances and frolics before him. And three, that this wisdom delights in humanity. See, the whole poem is of full love, compassion, intimacy, joy, and playfulness. David, for instance, responds when the ark was brought up to Jerusalem, dancing and shouting and celebrating in 2 Samuel 6. It is with this long and grand poem that these 9 chapters begin to draw a close when Proverbs 9 offers one last appeal to value wisdom over folly. Before the book reinstates the motto, the fear of the Lord, once again, because it it as you've noticed if you've read the Proverbs, they it starts out the fear of the Lord. It starts talking about these two ways, and then we see here in Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. And then, of course, we get into the next chapters. We go right back into the fear of the Lord, right? So it benefits us who hearken to the call of wisdom, and it sends us confidently and expectantly into the following chapters of the book of Proverbs, which we'll get into talking in from Proverbs 10 through 29. Understanding these first 9 chapters, it gets us prepared. So, Proverbs 10 through chapter 29, this contains the most familiar type of wisdom, individual proverbs. Chapter 1 through 9, it emphasized the benefits and motivation and creative design of wisdom. So, we see that what it would emphasize through the wisdom at work in the real world. But Proverbs demands a new and different discipline of thinking and acting than we are typically used to. They are not concerned with primarily with the world philosophies, the ethnical theories, or the timeless truths, but rather with the relating theological foundation of creation to the conditional, local, and timely, the right things and the best action in the right times and places. Like, fittingness, right? the right time and place to say things. Much like the way we thread lines from popular books and movies into our daily conversations. I remember back when I used to work, I mean, we would be quoting, uh, movies and whatnot. But wisdom shows up in all sorts of times and places. Granted, proverbs in any culture are usually passed on orally whenever the moment fits and not in list. But Proverbs is a collection of these timely sayings all put into one place. One of the um, you know consequences of living in our Western world that is science dominated culture. It is that we live with the tendency to approach these proverbs by reordering them into topics like speech, honesty, diligence, and laziness. And really, we're undoing the work here when we do this. First, we need to find a strong parallel between the proverbs and the reality of life, lived out as it is day to day. As much as we need um, to try to resist it, our lives are not orderly, and rather they jump from event to that experience with little warning of what will come next. I mean, granted, sometimes the Holy Spirit can warn you something's about to happen. So I'm not saying that doesn't take place. We're just talking in a general sense here. Not all the times we get a warning of something's going to happen till it happens. Second, we are attuned to many connections between proverbs that are situated near one another. Um, so when proverbs are collected and arranged, as in the book of Proverbs, a new dynamic literary potential is added. Um, Structurally and poetic tools, we are able to gain a real appreciation of these connections between these proverbs, and we can connect the metaphors, and this makes them memorable when we can do this. The proverbs supply basic instructions and extended metaphors to help us interpret these constantly changing events and to respond well in in this way. The book of Proverbs attests to the provisional nature of human life, and in our life we will never attain final order or final justice for this world. God's final redemptive work alone will do that. But Proverbs does invite us confidently in the fear of the Lord to work for that perfect world in the moment with the wisdom God gives us. So when we study the Proverbs, it is very, um, it's very key to realize that these are undervalued field of study. I think today's society is not digging into the depthness of the riches of what Proverbs can bring us. We, with the study of modern human language nowadays, it can kind of, you know, bring a little bit of a different perspective than what's actually being said with the modern language. I would like to note, though, not all proverbs are biblical. Now, the ones in the Bible are, but the word proverbs itself, the Egyptians have proverbs, the Mesopotamians had proverbs. All these other religions have proverbs. The Buddhists have proverbs, but the proverbs in the Bible, though, they bring us something. So, contradiction in hermeneutics is something really key to look at. So, for instance, here's some proverbs from modern culture that aren't biblical. The early bird gets the worm, right? Look before you leap. Money talks. Money isn't everything. These are modern day proverbs, but they're not biblical proverbs, but they can have a lesson behind them. I mean, early bird gets the worm. The Lord does say, rise up early and seek me, but it's in different terminology. These proverbs communicate two contradictory approaches to our behavior, right? In the first pair, we find both warning against procrastination and laziness, and a reminder of the danger that can happen when we're reckless, right? Look before you leap. The early bird gets the worm. We see these types of things, and this is key to applying Proverbs fittingly in different circumstances. That's why, remember, we call this fittingness. So, for instance, like Proverbs 26, um, from like verse 1 through 12, we get this excellent example of discerning the appropriate response in different situations. Proverbs 26:3, a whip for the horse, a bridle for the ass, and a rod for the fool's back. This gives us an example here. And then in verse 4 through 5, we are presented with what is clearly, uh, um, you know, um, you'll see right here. Look, verse 4 and 5. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou also be like unto him. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. Um, these contrary sayings stop us in our tracks and remind us about the great variety of people and circumstances that we'll meet in life. And they constrain us to think carefully about when one should answer a fool according to his folly and when we should not answer a fool according to his folly. That's a very key aspect. That's where discernment has to take in for sure. Speech, like wisdom in general, requires attention to every new and particular situation. The final verse through these first 12 we see here: Seest thou a man wise in his own conceit? There is more hope of a fool than of him, in verse 12. So, echoing the warning of Proverbs 3:5, do not be wise in your own eyes, right? You remember this back there. This verse reminds us how easily it is to think that we are wise when we are acting like fools, and how quickly we think we know what a proverb means. The conclusion of this poem is that it is fitting for wise people to be humble and know that they always need more wisdom. The focus on the fool in this poem is only for an example. Fittingness or making the appropriate response applies to all areas of life. In this way, wisdom is the hermeneutical key to interpreting. Hermeneutics is the science of interpreting the Bible. This is a term that we have put with it because there's a science behind interpreting the Bible. The Holy Spirit helps with this too, but without the hermeneutics, people don't understand the Bible. They go into their own interpretations instead of going into the way that we are meant to interpret it. Wisdom thus compares scenarios of behavior to what we know of the whole order and guides us into the appropriate actions that we must abide by. And this is because we know that God fashioned the world with boundaries, grooves, and curved places for, not curved, and carved places for everything. Um, we can be confident that He has a way for us to negotiate life with all its dilemmas. And when we're grounded in the fear of the Lord, wisdom looks to creation and finds the patterns that are meant to give order to our moral, social, economic, and political living. And that's what's so key through these. When we see that, for instance, Proverbs also talk about wealth and poverty, justice and righteousness. Another way to understanding these is the nature of some of these proverbs in the terms of, that there's a larger system. For instance, Proverbs 1 through 9 is filled with confident sayings that affirm the goodness of creation. Proverbs 10 through 29, we get that it teaches us to accept the disorder and mystery that meets us in real life. And that's, I think, kind of hard sometimes to, to do more times than others. For instance, Proverbs 11:16, it says, a gracious woman retaineth honor, and a strong man retains riches. We see this reality here, because we can have this table where, I mean, just imagine if we had like a little table up on the screen where, in two boxes, one is righteousness and two is wickedness. So, you would have wealth would be in the righteous, as one, and two, you would have poverty under the righteous, but then you would also have this box with wickedness. You would have wealth 3 wickedness and poverty 4 wickedness. So there can be wealth and poverty in righteousness, but also wealth and poverty in wickedness. And we see here this disorder of injustice in our world. We see also, let's go to chapter 13, verse 23, where it says, much food is in the tillage of the poor, but there is that is destroyed for want of judgment. Then we can also go, let's jump to chapter 19, and let's actually look in verse 10. Delight is not seemingly for a fool, much less for a servant to have rule over princes. So these are just a few examples here. This will become important also with this type of approach of how we approach these when we also approach Job and Ecclesiastes. That's also going to be a very important aspect when we approach those at some point throughout this series. We're going to also tackle those two, Job and Ecclesiastes. This perspective on injustice emerges in Proverbs. Um, we see here, for instance, let's go back to chapter 10. Let's look in verse 2. Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivereth from death. While humans cannot make sense of all the complexities and troubles that we face in life, we look forward to the day when God will judge all people with his own justice. And when we meet this mystery in life, we must have faith in the Lord, because there's always going to be something mysterious that happens in our life that we, maybe not, like Job, for instance. Job, he didn't blame God for anything, but he knew something was going on in his life. It wasn't revealed until the end of the book of Job, when the Lord came out of a whirlwind to be like, okay, now I know what's going on. Job also says, I wish that the words of mine were written down. Well, praise God, they were written down. We read them still today. The general principle of wisdom is that righteousness and wisdom do lead to blessing and wealth, but as Proverbs 10 through 29 makes it clear, in a fallen and broken world, there are many, um, you know, things to this rule that we need to realize. The Proverbs is aware of and works with the paradox of life without presenting a final solution to the problem. Ultimately, Proverbs hopes that the Lord's justice will finally come, but leaves it open as to how it will take place. And then, of course, we get these last two chapters, chapter 30 and 31, as we can call the end of Proverbs. The words of Agur, the son of Jeki, even the prophecy, the man spake unto Ithiel and Unkel. We see here um, that this poem begins and has no clear ending. Some have thought that it ends with verse 9, but then in other verses, like verse 33, we start seeing that there's still things being talked about here. So, um, you know, what is clear though is that wisdom in these final chapters flow like a speech that makes strong statements about the perplexity humans must face in trying to live a wise life. The introductory here is, we can only begin to think that this man might be weary. Um, we see here in verse 3, I neither learned wisdom nor have the knowledge of the holy. Um, so when we see this, besides depicting the world and its strangeness, we see here that this man being presented in verse 1 also communicates, um, you know, what the discovered things that he discovers, it surpasses human understanding. These give us a sense of our we're not infinite, we're finfinite. You take the infinite, you take the n off the finfinite. We are finfinite, um into being individuals, human beings, and we have a dependency on God and hope for his future restoration of all things. Proverbs 31, uh specifically, you know verse 10 to 31, is a sophisticated poetic hymn to a valiant woman and a remarkable conclusion to the Proverbs. In the chapter, it actually begins with the instructions from a mother to her son, King Lemuel. But most of Proverbs 31 is focused from 10 to 31. Most people focus on that part. These instructions consist of a fairly traditional group of wisdom sayings from a mother to her royal son concerning modesty, humility, temperance, and justice. And in the ancient Near East, the king was the cultural example of wisdom and a model for the subjects of the kingdom. Of course, we read about some kings. It's like, well, they didn't really hold that type of example that we're seeing of modesty and whatnot. Um, I think the Book of Esther kind of shows King Ahasuerus a whole different ball game of how kings were looked at back then, that they were supposed to have these type of examples. But he, in the beginning, we read about him. Hey, come out here, show your beauty. He's talking to his wife, and they're drunk, beyond drunk. So it's definitely different than how the Bible tells us, and how even ancient Near Eastern cultures tell us kings were supposed to conduct themselves. But this mother's voice reminds us also of the admonitions that were found in Proverbs 1 through 9. Here in the first 9 verses of Proverbs 31, this reminds us that it's echoing some of the things, parents pleading with their children to get wisdom. So this poem in Proverbs 31, we had the first 9 verses, then we get to the next 10 through 31. This fits very naturally in its context with the cosmic parent matrix of Proverbs 1 through 9. The woman is highlighted as the focus of wisdom, and unlike her role as a cosmic figure, here she is a local, uh, you know, a local woman of the town, a mother of a home, a wife. And it's very awesome because we see how this continues to be exemplified. And honestly, I could speak more on this, but really what I want to do is reach this out where we've kind of went over an outline of these. Now we can kind of go through. Let's in the next video we do, let's break these down individually and go a little more deep in complexity with them, now that we've kind of had a introductory to these. And I hope that it maybe leads you to say, I really want to read the book of Proverbs again. I really want to dig in and study the book of Proverbs again, because there's always something we can get out of it. And maybe you save this playlist and say, I'm going to look at things from this playlist, pause it, read a section of this, and maybe you'll get something out of this. That's my hope when I put things out here like this, is to give you some nuggets, and maybe you'll find some things that was not found within this study. But maybe they'll be in the next study, and then you'll be like, oh man, he found this when the next video came up. It's exactly what I found. I just wanted to break it down enough for this. And I think this is a perfectly good wrapping up point before we get into deepening, diving deeper and digging for more treasure throughout the wisdom of the Bible. We fight from victory, not from defeat. That is thanks to King Jesus. We give all praise, honor, and glory to him.